I'm Newman-Griffis, and I'm delighted to talk about our perspective on translational science in the NLP field. So, what is translational NLP? Well, to answer that and define what the idea is behind translational NLP, I want to start by talking about mushrooms. Now, when you look at a set of mushrooms like this, what looks like separate things above the soil turns out to be part of the same interconnected organism with this mycelial layer tying it all together underneath the surface. We can think about the NLP field in the same way. We often view basic and applied NLP as two very separate areas of inquiry. Basic science is focused on generalizable systems and universal principles, and applied science is tailored to specific application needs. And translating between basic and applied NLP, translating basic innovations into successful applications, and finding new research questions posed by applications is not something we really formally study. But there's a lot of work that's going on underneath the surface, and looking at those processes and how we frame those kinds of translational questions is a really important part of the work that we do in the NLP field. And we actually see this historically in the development of the field, as new information needs have led to really deep connections and enormous impact between applications and basic science. So the need to translate scientific papers in the 1950s and 60s, for example, led to the founding of machine translation, which has driven many of the technologies and data sets that we're using now, as well as major commercial applications. We see the same effects from needing to process the really rapidly growing amount of information on the web in the 1990s. And again, with the development of speech processing in the 60s, which was an answer to the need to deal with high volume in call centers. So what we're presenting in this work is a general framework to help frame translational problems and design translational efforts to really improve the successful exchange between basic and applied NLP. So this then begs the question, what makes NLP research translational? So we've adapted the term translational from biology and medicine. And based on its usage there, the term translational NLP we're using to describe research focusing on two categories. The first is application-driven solutions that have generalizable impact. So this is work that is driven by a specific application need, but produces a fundamental insight that informs many other kinds of NLP work. And the second is reusable processes and technologies to help us bridge between basic and applied science. And we can think about translational NLP in these two different areas in terms of the idea of moving from systems to solutions. So an NLP solution is one that really addresses an information need in a real-world context. And this involves multiple different kinds of stakeholders. So we have the NLP experts, who bring the knowledge of the methods of how to work with, how to represent data. Our work is then contextualized by the subject matter experts, who drive the information needs we're trying to address and set the context of what that information is being used for. And then in the middle, we have a wide range of end users who work with NLP solutions on a practical basis. And this is never just one group of users. It tends to be a spectrum of all different kinds of technical levels and organizational roles. And then the translational NLP researcher is the one who brings all of these viewpoints together in designing and managing the complete solution. That design process, then, involves several different kinds of questions, which we discuss in our paper, but I'll touch on briefly here. So solution design starts with the information that we want to analyze and the data that we have to work with. That helps to set the context for the different kinds of NLP tasks and technologies and knowledge resources that we have available to use in tackling that information need. As well as the questions of how do we evaluate the quality of the solution? How do we interpret what comes out of the solution? And how do we engineer the overall product? This is, of course, not a complete list, but is a set of really fundamental points for starting the discussion around any translational NLP solution, which will, of course, evolve and continue to change over time. So to see what these questions look like in practice, and how it is that they lead to new NLP research, let's look at an example of translational NLP research. So when we're looking at a translational NLP project, we can frame it in terms of three things. There's the problem that it aimed to solve, which we can think about in terms of our 8 different design questions. There's the solution that it produced, which we can think of in terms of publications or software, and the translational impacts that it had, which helped to inform future work and new projects. So we'll take as one example some of the previous work that we've done on NLP for disability review. Here, the information need that we're targeting is finding evidence related to functional limitations. The data that we're working with are heterogeneous medical records, and our partners and end users are disability and rehabilitation experts. So this setting has opened up several different kinds of translational research questions for us that have been motivated by the specific application, but also have much broader translational impact. So for example, we needed to be able to represent disability-related medical concepts that we didn't have annotated data for or structured knowledge resources for. So in this case, we had unusual data characteristics and a lack of available resources. So we developed a new distance supervision-based representation learning method for entities that addressed our application need and also had a generalizable translational impact on enabling learning representations of a wider variety of entities from a wider variety of corpora. In another case, we've needed to be able to extract long and syntactically complex descriptions of functional status, for which neither the appropriate technology nor really the appropriate evaluation method was really clear a priori. We built an information extraction system that we designed for flexibility and for high recall, which again served our application need and also had broader translational impacts for starting NLP work on new kinds of information. So here we were able to create a resource that can help smooth the process of expanding to new information types. And on the process side of translational NLP, in some work that we've done on classifying different kinds of functional activity descriptions in text, we looked at different task paradigms for categorization and produced some reusable guidance for building NLP tools to categorize any new kind of medical information. So this really produced a starting point for new efforts that are aimed at expanding the boundaries of medical NLP. These papers are, of course, only one line of translational research. There are many more to be found in the literature, and we discuss several more examples in our paper. But we can think more broadly about translational NLP research as falling at various points along this spectrum of generalizability. So at one end, we have really application-agnostic technologies, things like language modeling techniques. And at the other, we have fully application-specific, tailored, deployed technologies, things that are really addressing a very specific need in a very specific setting. And we can think about different points along this spectrum of work addressing broad groups of applications or smaller sets of application variants. And our 3 papers that I mentioned fall at different points along this spectrum. And this is really what translational NLP research is looking at, is different kinds of generalization that inform different parts of the field while addressing real-world problems. So what does all this mean for ACL? Well, there's a few different parts to recognizing and growing our translational NLP research. First off, the ACL community and the translational NLP research that we have really is that mycelial layer that ties together all these different kinds of research, not only that we produce, but also the ways in which NLP is used in other communities. And so if we want a strong translational system that can feed our basic science and applications and also feed other people's usage of NLP, we need to feed it with the right things. So our work really needs to maintain a healthy mix of the clean benchmarks that we use for basic innovation with the messy kinds of data that we work with in applications. And the beauty of modeling advances being balanced with the funkiness and the messy problems that we run into when we're applying our technologies in practice. And as any gardener will know, really just generally getting our hands dirty is what really helps us to grow. And this kind of balance between the clean and the messy is how we get the most out of the translational parts of our work and keep our field really healthy. So for some of what that looks like in terms of more concrete next steps, looking to the past, we can start to dig back into the literature to understand what translational work have we been doing and what have we learned so far using the framework that we present here as a lens. In the present, we can grow our synergy between ACL and other research communities that are using NLP to exchange ideas and learn about new challenges. And looking to the future, there are lots of challenging research opportunities for us to take on in multidisciplinary work using real-world data. So this is the start of a conversation, and we really look forward to hearing from you in the conference discussion or via email or any other way about your thoughts on translational NLP research and what this is going to look like for ACL going forwards. Thank you very much.